The growing economic partnership between the federal government, the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Federal Republic of Germany witnessed further expansion strengthened by further talks, memorandum of understanding signed by the two countries. Speaking in Berlin, Germany on the 10th German-Nigeria Business Forum, President Bola Tinubu assured that past obstacles associated with investments in Nigeria are gone for good. President stressed that the Nigerian-German relationship is top priority of his government, with the elimination of all past investment obstacles and all of this. But let's look at some burning economic issues that we have in here and to see how this can help attract the necessary investment. Chief Investment Officer, AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde is in the house. Thank you so much. It's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, I know a lot is on when we talk about burning issues now, but I'm starting with inflation and all efforts by CBN to curb it. We seem not to be getting there. We're still seeing it going the other way. Someone said it's taller than the Cocoa House in Ibadan.
I guess that's on a lighter note.
Yes.
But again, it's going to get worse. That's the fact on ground. When you look at the sources of pressure to the current inflationary pressure, I would say, that we are seeing right now. The CBN seems not to have a hand on it, perhaps because the CBN is distracted. And let's come back to the joint. I mean, recently, we have seen efforts by the central bank to keep the pace of interest rate hike. You know, the momentum is faster with the new administration of the central bank than what it was before. You will recall that the Monetary Policy Committee has been hiking interest rates since last year, May, to be specific, and that effort has been consistent. The implication was that we didn't see the effect on the market rate. But recently, especially with this new central bank, even though there has not been Monetary Policy Committee meetings, it seems like the rhetoric around interest rate, I mean, there are a couple of OMO issuances where the central bank has hiked interest rate. And in turn, the DMO has followed suit. But, you know, the argument is that we have to see economics. You know, economics is not one of those disciplines that is, you know, an applied or physical science. In applied or physical science, you know, when you take two elements together, it will always result in, the answer is a fact. You know, every time it's constant that you put, if you put, I'm not a science guru here, you understand, but I mean, if you take oxygen and nitrogen, whatever result it will give you 2,000 years ago, it's still the same result it will give you. Economics is not a discipline that aligns with that, because it's applied on humans. That's why we said it's a social science. Now, look at interest rate. You know, people talk about it, that interest rate every time, you know, when there is inflationary pressure, the next move is to hike interest rate. But I mean, let us look at, you know, let's dissect it more closely and to say, okay, you hike interest rate, to what intent, to what purpose? So when OMO rates and treasury bills rate and bonds yields are rising, what is the implication on the real economy? You know, the very easy one that you can pick is that with rising interest rate, you know, banks will keep raising their interest rate. And when people go to their banks, they pay more. Manufacturers pay more, you know, to get funding from the banks. Yeah. And when they do that, what then happens? You know, if the so-called manufacturers have the opportunity to increase their own prices, they will do so to reflect the high interest rate they are paying to the banks. That's one way. If they don't have opportunity to hike the interest rate, they will absorb the cost and the prices remain the same. So from those two scenarios I painted, and whether it is a commercial paper issuance where interest rate is higher, the effect is the same. Now, in the first instance, if you hike interest rate and then the banks lend at a higher cost, and, you know, producers buy at a much higher interest rate, and they pass the cost to consumer, the implication is still more higher prices. And higher prices means higher inflation, if you understand what I mean. So the central bank needs to sit down and look at the situation that we have at hand. We are not dealing with a 12%, 13%, 14% inflation. The dynamics we are dealing with now is a 27% inflation, where food prices, you know, the food inflation in this case is about 30%, you know. I dare say that a treatment of interest rate hike is not all that has to be done. In fact, I say there is a point that interest rate will be hiked and then the country will collapse. And I'm being honest with you, because you look at the rate of borrowing of government.
This debt service is about 90-something%.
Yes, it's 99%.
So we're living on a lifeline of 1%.
Absolutely. And if you look at, and that was as of July, right? If you look at the level of borrowing as we continue to go with interest rate hikes, DMO seems to be following the market. As the market is demanding higher interest rate, DMO is moving the needle. The implication is that it will get to a point that debt service to revenue will hit a 130, 140%. At that level, you can't fund any infrastructure. You keep borrowing to pay the current expenditure. And then it gets to a point that ways and means it's inevitable. Because if you look at the budget cycle and all of the, government is projecting about 25 trillion budget for 2024. Yes. The implication of that is that if revenue fundamentals do not improve, there is the government will not be able to survive without ways and means. So inflation will have no end. So we have to sit down and dissect the situation. The current inflationary pressure we are facing, is it such that interest rate can fix? Because a problem created by ways and means, right? So if we say that if inflation is a monetary phenomenon, government went on a borrowing spree, central bank printing money and giving it to the government. Now, when they got those monies, what did they do with it? Did the salary of people increase? No. Salaries have not increased, but more money has been pumped into the system, some stolen, the ones that are not stolen, that are still within the system. They are pressuring your exchange rate. And the implication of the pressure you're seeing on exchange rate is that you're having crisis maintaining a stable exchange rate, which also has its own inflationary impact. So are those problems that interest rate can fix?
No.
Those are the things we need to think about, because economics is a social science. It's not applied science. Higher interest rate does not always fix all the problems all the time. Ghana has been hiking interest rate for only God knows when. But what is even the effectiveness of our transmission mechanism between policy rate and market rate? How effective is it? You understand? So those are the things that central bank needs to sit down. Now that brings me to the point that what is the policy agenda of this current central bank? I'm not sure.
I think they need to come up with a paper.
There's been no communication.
The bankers' dinner is coming up, I think, on Friday. And we hear that there's going to be
it's been 2 months.
It's a yearly ritual.
Yeah.
So we expect that event.
But this is I want to believe that the administration of the current central bank,
I agree with you,
was prepared for this job. It's been 2 months. What's the communication?
Should at least have a policy paper.
Exactly. What's the policy paper we are working with? What's the agenda? Mr. Emefiele, from the first day he came into office, he told us about his own agenda. In fact, I think about less than a month after then, he did a press conference and told us, even though it was a disaster,
that he would go through those policies in unorthodox policies. I remember that.
And it brought us to where we are now.
Yeah.
The current central bank cannot keep silent. This is the time you sit down. If you have a plan that you are working with, you need to communicate it to the market. Look at the U.S. U.S. went through its own episode of high inflationary pressure. But the Fed never ceases to talk. Beyond the monetary policy meeting that are scheduled, the Fed has a time that they come up and then they speak. This is the time that this government, not just the government, I'm talking about central bank now.
In particular,
government is speaking.
You see what even happened.
The central bank,
in the
yes, the central bank is more critical to getting us out of whatever, financial conundrum that we have found ourselves right now. With all fairness to the current central bank, they have not created the problem. They have a new job, but they need to rise to the occasion very fast. You see, we've seen different communication as far as exchange rate is concerned. At some point, exchange rate went as high as 1,003 at the parallel market.
Yes.
Then it came down, settled at around 1,000.
Yes.
But because there's no communication, people are like, what are we even working with? Prices have skyrocketed again, So this is the time that we need to know what agenda the central bank is working with. Now, that is very important because it's supposed to guide the market. In fact, it will guide economic actors, those who are acting in the economy, whether you're a consumer or a producer or even a regulator, as it were. And then the market itself is not left in the dark. so that people know exactly what we are working with. But I dare say that the path we are going through now, just hiking interest rate endlessly. Excuse me, MPR is at 18.5. Market rate has already caught up with the MPR.
Almost 30%.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but we are talking about inflation at 27%.
Yeah.
Is the government, is the DMO prepared to keep raising interest rate to as high as 27 or 30%? By then, the country is gone. Because we are talking about debt service. So what it means is that every time you borrow as much as $1 trillion, and I mean, every auction, the DMO will borrow close to about 500 billion. So which means that in a year, the DMO is borrowing close to 6 trillion from the bonds market alone. So imagine the current interest rate element. I mean, 18%. If you are paying 18% for a 6 trillion, you can tell how much you are increasing your debt. At the minimum, you are increasing your debt profile by nothing less than 2 trillion by debt servicing costs alone. And that is from the bonds market. I mean, I've not talked about ways and means and the interest rate they have to pay on that. I've not talked about the Euro bonds. We're in a mess that we need to manage. I don't know whether that word is allowed on TV, but what I'm just trying to say is that we're in a very dire situation that we need to carefully address. Yes, we can't leave things to chance, and we have to be deliberate. We have to be deliberate. Now, people will argue and say that, okay, inflation is rising. What can the central bank do than to raise interest rate? Now, we often talk about monetary fiscal policy mix. There has to be a handshake between the monetary policy authority and the fiscal authority. The central bank cannot just keep hiking interest rate. Because the problem will come back to the central bank to solve. Because by the time the debt management office, on behalf of the Ministry of Finance and then on behalf of federal government of Nigeria, is borrowing at a very expensive rate, we will get our debt level to a position that it becomes unsustainable. And people will argue, look at countries that are facing debt crisis today. Their debt to GDP over 100% did not get there in one day. It took a journey. And from where we are now, I mean, the last 8 years of the previous administration did not help us. I think our debt to GDP more than doubled in those 8 years. Now, we are at 40% level, and we are dangerously, this is the point that we don't need to be talking about debt to GDP as a matter of fact, because that is a very deceptive ratio. When you look at debt to GDP, I mean, government does not own the revenue, so to speak, of what we call the GDP value of Nigeria. So to that extent, I think a more measured metric to look at would be debt service to revenue. And that is the ratio that is nearing 100% as we speak today. And if we continue the rate we are going, before the end of the next fiscal year, we will cross a 130% level. I mean, and it becomes a level that it becomes unsustainable. The other argument people give for interest rate, is that interest rate can be used to more or less attract more foreign portfolio investment. But the dire situation that we have found ourselves today means that no new investor from a portfolio point of view wants to consider Nigeria. And that's the truth. Even when our interest rate gets to as high as 25% or 30%, it's difficult for them, especially when there is no clear-cut policy as to how you want to manage your exchange rate. And you know that their conversion point is their exchange rate. Are they sure that what they are bringing in, they will not lose 100% to exchange rate depreciation alone? So those are the issues. So let's focus on foreign portfolio investment. If there is anything, maybe foreign direct investment, that's what we should pursue. The one that was just signed in Germany when we are here. That's a foreign direct investment. Those are more patient capital. But for foreign portfolio investment, let's not use interest rate to attract them. In the first instance, they will not come. Then if we want to, apply or go that route, perhaps we are talking about keeping the funds that are within our system. Then a market segmentation, which is already in place by way of OMO, can be the solution to that. So your OMO rate for all is what can go to 100%. It will be the cost of monetary policy, because at that point it's the central bank that is responsible. But the moment your interest rate is crossing a 20% level, you are setting a dangerous trap for the fiscal authority, because the government cannot function effectively without borrowing. I mean, that has been our lifestyle, and if you look at our fiscal deficit to GDP, is huge. You understand? Not just that, the fiscal deficit to the budget, the total budget of government is significant. So it means that you are setting a trap for the federal government to fall into. And this is not what the country needs at this point in time.
A lot of work is being done to ramp up production, crude production, to get more money. Taiwo Yedele's team is also working to harmonize tax and all of this. So I'm looking at, do you see us raising revenue internally anyhow with all of this that we are putting together?
The low-hanging fruit is to ramp up our production. Now, if there's anything that has affected the oil output, is insecurity.
Yes.
So if we can fix that, well, maybe insecurity coupled with some sabotage,
I think that's more correct.
Individuals who are trying to gain or game the system, so to speak. These are things that I believe that the government can address. I mean, at a point in time in this country, we had this problem that the government, I think it was the government of Yaradua, had to engage with the militants in the Niger Delta, just to to improve the production of oil at that point in time. Some programs were set up, and I mean, the point we are facing right now is what you call theft. Theft on a large scale, organized.
Large scale, yes.
In an organized scale.
Yes.
I also believe that the government can fix it. It's just a question of having discussions, and when you use discussion, they call it carrot and stick. If you give them carrot and they are not going to take, use your stick. That's why you're government. So we shouldn't have a situation where we keep talking about oil output and low oil output and not able to get our revenue to what it should be. It's the low-hanging fruit, especially to improve the foreign exchange earnings for the country so that the central bank has enough capacity to defend the currency. What we are saying now is easy to read. It's easy to read. I imagine that the new central bank got into office and found out that the reserve level is probably worse than it's showing, and they feel helpless. But again, solving that problem of theft, as far as oil output is concerned, is a way to get us moving, and is a low-hanging fruit for the government to pluck, so that when we fix that, it begins to impact, especially on the capacity of the central bank to defend the currency, among other efforts that they are putting in place.
It's worrisome, but looking forward, we are moving towards the end of the year, and everyone is looking like what's playing out. Purchasing power remains low. What sort of, let's look at it, what sort of Christmas are we looking at? Yes, as an economist now.
That's a difficult question.
Very difficult
to answer. Knowing that it doesn't look like it's a good Christmas. You look at the pressure that has bedeviled the the standard of living of people. Cost of living is so high.
Maybe some palliatives.
Some of the economic things. Yeah, palliatives. As an economist, I don't believe in palliatives because see, we stopped the payment of subsidy, right? It's good to give palliatives, but how are they administered? In our country, we know the fact, that these palliatives, some will steal some, maybe a few will get to the hands of people. But even the ones that we get to the hands of people, is it a sustainable way that we have done it? And we could waste ₦1 trillion and we have not achieved what we are supposed to achieve. But if the ₦1 trillion is used to create jobs, you can employ more people, it's more sustainable. So my model for developing an economy, is still more of the market way. You can develop the economy through the market way. It's just that where we have found ourselves is a very, grave situation, I must say. So if government is saying, I'm giving palliative because of the difficulty in the economy, it is understandable. But we must not lose sight of the most enduring policy measures that we need to put in place so that the people that are giving palliative this year, you may not have to give them palliative in 2024. Because your policies that are enduring, we absorb them, and then they can become productive again, and even pay taxes within the same economy.
Interesting stuff. I know we can stay the whole day on this show talking Nigeria's economy, but that's what time can take. Mr. Robert Omo today is Chief Investment Officer. He's with AfriInvest West Africa. Thank you so much. It's really good to have you in the studio.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.